The house buzzed with quiet energy as the afternoon sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting warm hues over the living room. Maria arranged the last set of glasses on the table, her hands moving mechanically, her mind elsewhere. Darren was coming home today, and though she knew she shouldn't feel a flicker of excitement, she did. James, her husband, sat at his desk in the corner, engrossed in work as always. His presence was more of a shadow than a partner. Maria glanced at him. His once attentive gaze had turned into something cold and distant over the years. Their conversations had dwindled into exchanges about bills, schedules, and forgotten plans. She sighed quietly, reminding herself that it was normal. Marriages changed over time. Still, a hollow ache settled in her chest. When Darren finally walked through the door, the room seemed to brighten. He had grown since the last time Maria saw him, a man now, with a confident air and a charming smile that easily lit up his face. "Maria," he greeted warmly, pulling her into a tight hug. She felt the solid strength of his arms and, for a fleeting second, closed her eyes, letting herself savor the comfort of his warmth. "Welcome back," she said, pulling away and forcing herself to sound casual. "How was the trip?" Darren chuckled. "Long, but I'm glad to be home. The food at uni is awful. I missed your cooking." James barely looked up from his laptop. "Good to see you, son," he said, his tone flat. Distracted, Darren's smile faltered, but he quickly recovered. "Good to see you too, Dad." Later that evening, Maria found herself lingering in the kitchen while Darren stood nearby, recounting stories about his time away. He was animated, his voice full of energy, and Maria couldn't help but laugh at his tales. It had been so long since she felt this kind of lightness. "You're too kind, Maria," Darren said after a particularly funny story, his eyes locking onto hers. "Dad's lucky to have you." Her breath caught for a moment. The compliment was innocent enough, but something about the way he said it made her chest tighten. She quickly busied herself with stirring the pot on the stove, not trusting herself to respond. The evening wore on, and Maria noticed the small ways Darren filled the void James left. He helped her set the table, asked her questions about her day, and actually listened to the answers. James, meanwhile, was glued to his phone, his presence almost entirely forgotten. Sheila arrived late into the evening, her laugh ringing out as she embraced Maria. "You're glowing," she teased, her sharp eyes scanning the room. "What's the occasion?" Maria brushed off the comment with a laugh, but Sheila's words lingered. Sheila had always been perceptive, her intuition unnervingly accurate. As the night continued, Maria found herself avoiding her friend's knowing gaze, unsure of what it was Sheila might see. By the time the evening ended, Maria felt an unfamiliar mixture of guilt and anticipation brewing within her. Maria woke earlier than usual the next morning, drawn to the quiet stillness of the house. She found Darren in the kitchen, already awake, sipping coffee. His relaxed smile greeted her as she stepped in. "Morning, Maria," he said warmly, his deep voice filling the room. "Morning," she replied, surprised by his early rise. "Couldn't sleep. Jet lag, I guess," he said with a shrug. "Figured I'd get a head start on the day." He gestured toward the coffee pot. "Want some?" She hesitated but nodded. Darren poured her a cup, their hands brushing lightly as he passed it to her. The brief touch made her stomach flutter, and she cursed herself for noticing. She sipped her coffee, trying to focus on the mundane rather than the way his presence seemed to change the air around her. They chattered casually, the conversation flowing effortlessly, and Maria found herself laughing more than she had in weeks. Darren's charm was undeniable, and his attention felt intoxicating. He asked about her hobbies, her interests, things James hadn't bothered to inquire about in years. She felt seen in a way she hadn't for so long, and it terrified her how much she liked it. As the days passed, Darren's presence became a fixture in Maria's routine. They spent more time together under the guise of simple tasks. He joined her in the garden, offering to help with the weeds. They cooked meals side by side, laughing over her insistence on sticking to recipes while he improvised. Maria told herself it was harmless, just a mother and stepson bonding. But the moments of closeness grew more frequent. When Darren stood behind her to reach for something in the cupboard, his hand grazing her arm, her heart raced. When he complimented the dress she wore one afternoon, she felt her cheeks flush like a schoolgirl. One evening, while James worked late yet again, Maria and Darren sat on the patio, sipping wine. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Darren leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on her. "You deserve better, Maria," he said softly, his voice tinged with something she couldn't quite name. She stiffened. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, then leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "I mean, I see how hard you try. You give everything to this family, to Dad, and it's like he doesn't even notice. It's not fair." Maria's breath caught. "He's just busy," she said, though the words sounded hollow even to her. Darren shook his head. "That's not an excuse. You're incredible, Maria. Anyone would be lucky to have you." His words hung in the air, heavy and charged. Maria felt her pulse quicken as she searched for a response. But none came. Darren's gaze didn't waver, and for a brief, dangerous moment, she wondered what it would feel like to let herself lean into that attention. Instead, she stood abruptly. "It's getting late," she said, her voice shaky. "We should go inside." Darren nodded but didn't break eye contact. "Of course. Good night, Maria." She turned and walked away, her heart pounding in her chest. She told herself she needed to stop this before it went too far. Deep down, a small treacherous part of her wasn't sure if she wanted to. The house was quiet again, the kind of stillness that made Maria's thoughts louder than she wanted them to be. Jane was at work as usual, and Darren was in the living room. She told herself to stay busy, to avoid letting her mind wander where it shouldn't. But when she passed the doorway and saw him stretched out on the couch, scrolling through his phone, she hesitated. "Hey, Maria," Darren called out, noticing her. His smile was easy, inviting, and before she knew it, she was stepping into the room. "You're taking it easy today," she said lightly, trying to ignore how her heart sped up just being around him. "I earned it," he teased. "Want to sit with me for a bit?" She hesitated, knowing she shouldn't, but his tone made it impossible to say no. She sank into the chair across from him, her hands gripping the armrest tightly as though grounding herself. They started talking again, as they always seemed to these days. Darren had a way of drawing her out, making her laugh, making her feel seen. She felt lighter, freer, when she was around him. It wasn't fair, but she couldn't deny it. At some point, the conversation slowed, and the air between them changed. Darren sat up, leaning forward, his gaze locking onto hers with an intensity that made her stomach flip. "Maria," he said quietly, "can I ask you something?" She nodded, unsure if her voice would even work. "Are you happy?" His words were soft, but the weight behind them was undeniable. She opened her mouth to answer, but nothing came out. Was she happy? She didn't even know anymore. "You don't have to answer," he said when her silence stretched too long. I can see it. You know, you deserve so much more than this. Her breath caught, and she stood abruptly, trying to put distance between them. Darren, we can't. I'm not saying anything wrong, he interrupted. Standing too. He was close now. Too close. I just want you to know that you're not invisible. You're amazing, Maria. And you shouldn't have to settle for being ignored. Her pulse raced as she took a step back. But he followed. His hand reached out, gently brushing hers, and the warmth of his touch sent a shiver through her. Darren, this is... Tell me to stop, he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. If you want me to stop, I will, but I don't think you do. She should have said it. She should have told him to stop, to leave, to never bring this up again. But she couldn't. Her body betrayed her, her silence speaking volumes. Slowly, he leaned closer, his hand now resting on hers. She felt frozen, caught between the crushing weight of guilt and the undeniable pull of desire. When his lips finally brushed hers, she didn't pull away. The kiss was tentative at first, as though both of them were testing the boundaries they were about to destroy. But it quickly deepened, and Maria felt herself giving in completely. Every thought of consequences pushed aside in favor of the raw, overwhelming sensation of being wanted. When they finally broke apart, breathless and shaken, Maria stepped back, her hand covering her mouth. Darren, we can't. This is wrong. I know, he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his eyes. But it doesn't feel wrong, does it? She didn't answer. She couldn't. Instead, she turned and fled the room, leaving him standing there, his words echoing in her mind. It didn't feel wrong, and that terrified her. Maria avoided Darren for the next 2 days, throwing herself into chores, errands, and anything that kept her away from the suffocating pull she felt around him. But avoiding him didn't erase what had happened. It was all she could think about: the kiss, his touch, the way it made her feel alive in a way she hadn't in years. James remained oblivious. He came home late, exhausted, barely sparing her a glance before retreating to his office. When he did speak, it was about trivial things: groceries, bills, the weekend plans. His indifference only magnified the storm inside Maria. On the 3rd evening, Maria found Sheila waiting for her in the kitchen. The sharp look in her friend's eyes made her heart skip a beat. You've been acting strange, Sheila said bluntly, crossing her arms. What's going on? Maria forced a smile. Nothing, just busy, I guess. Sheila tilted her head, studying her closely. Busy avoiding Darren. More like. The words hit Maria like a slap. What are you talking about? I see things, Maria, Sheila said, her voice quiet but firm. You think I don't notice the way he looks at you, or the way you light up when he's around? Don't insult me. Maria's stomach churned. It's not what you think, she stammered. Then tell me what it is, Sheila challenged. Maria opened her mouth to respond, but couldn't find the words. The silence stretched, and Sheila's expression hardened. I don't know what you're doing, Maria, but you need to stop, Sheila said finally, for everyone's sake. That night, Maria sat alone in the living room, her thoughts a tangled mess. Sheila was right, she knew that, but stopping felt impossible, as if summoned by her thoughts. Darren walked in, his presence filling the room. He hesitated when he saw her, his expression a mix of caution and determination. Maria, he said softly, we need to talk. She shook her head. No, we don't. Yes, we do, he insisted, stepping closer. You can't pretend this didn't happen. I can't. She stood, Her arms wrapped around herself. "Darren, this is a mistake. It has to stop." "Why?" he asked, his voice breaking slightly. "Why does it have to stop when it feels like the only real thing in my life?" His words hit her harder than she expected. She turned away, tears stinging her eyes. "Because it's wrong. Because it will destroy everything." "It doesn't have to," he said, his voice softer now. "We can figure this out together." Maria turned back to face him, her heart aching. "You don't understand. If James finds out, if Sheila knows." "She already knows," he interrupted, his tone calm. "Or at least she suspects. But I don't care about any of that. I care about you." The sincerity in his eyes was unbearable. Maria felt her resolve crumbling. But before she could respond, the sound of a door opening upstairs froze them both. James appeared at the top of the stairs, his face shadowed in the dim light. "What's going on?" he asked, his tone sharp. Maria's heart sank as she met Darren's gaze. This was the moment everything would unravel. She opened her mouth, but the words wouldn't come. Darren stepped forward, his voice steady. "Nothing, Dad. We were just talking." James's eyes narrowed, flicking between them. "Talking about what?" Maria finally found her voice. "The garden," she said quickly. "I was asking Darren about fixing the shed." James didn't look convinced, but he didn't press further. "I'm going to bed," he said curtly, before turning away. When he was gone, Maria exhaled shakily. Darren reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "This has to end," she whispered, her voice trembling. Darren's expression fell, but he nodded. "If that's what you want." Maria didn't answer. Instead, she turned and walked away, her chest heavy with regret and relief. Upstairs, James was already asleep, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath his roof. But Maria knew it wouldn't stay hidden forever. Secrets like this had a way of coming to light. And when they did, there would be no escaping the fallout.